Two DEA agents disappeared in the wilderness 8 years later. A cave reveals the truth. Two female DEA agents vanished in Washington state while investigating cross-border trafficking. Their last known location remained a mystery for 8 long years. Then, a mining crew, exploring a remote cave system, stumbled upon evidence of the missing agents in a flooded chamber. A discovery that turned everything. Authorities thought they knew about the case upside down. The shrill ring of Marcus Rivera's phone shattered his sleep at exactly 8 o'clock a.m., yanking him from restless dreams that had haunted him for nearly a decade. His hand fumbled across the nightstand in his Seattle apartment, knocking over a half-empty water glass before finding the buzzing device. The caller ID flashed his supervisor from DEA International Operations, Director Patricia Thornton. She never called this early unless something big had broken. Rivera, he answered, his voice still thick with sleep. Marcus, I need you to sit down if you're not already, Thornton said, her tone carrying a weight that instantly cleared the fog from his mind. We've had a development in Elena's case. His sister's name hit him like a punch to the gut. 8 years of unanswered questions. 8 years of wondering if she was dead or alive. 8 years of guilt for not being there when she needed him most. Marcus gripped the phone tighter, his knuckles whitening against the black case. Carl Hendress and his mining crew were conducting routine mineral surveys in an abandoned shaft near the Canadian border. Thornton continued. They spotted a white Ford F-150 through a natural skylight in the cave ceiling. Marcus felt the room tilt. The Vang matches Elena's missing vehicle. He forced himself to breathe, to process the words. The truck, it's definitely theirs. Field verification confirms it, Thornton said. The vehicle appears to have fallen or been pushed through the opening above, landing in a partially flooded cavern below. I'm sending you the coordinates now. Local forensics is already on scene, but I wanted you to hear it from me first. Marcus was already pulling on his clothes, the phone wedged between his shoulder and ear. How long has it been down there? Any signs of... He couldn't finish the sentence. That's one of the concerning aspects, Thornton said carefully. Despite supposedly being submerged for 8 years, the preliminary report shows surprisingly minimal rust or water damage. The forensics team leader believes it may have been placed there much more recently than the original disappearance date. The implication sent a chill down Marcus's spine. If the truck had been moved recently, someone had been covering their tracks all these years, someone who might still be out there. He threw his DEA jacket over his shoulder holster, grabbing his credentials and car keys. I'm heading there now. Marcus, I know this is personal, but you need to maintain professional distance, Thornton warned. We're treating this as a potential crime scene, not just a recovery operation. Understood. But they both knew he was lying. Nothing about Elena's disappearance could ever be just professional for him. The drive north took Marcus through the dense Washington forests, Seattle's urban sprawl giving way to towering evergreens and winding mountain roads. He'd driven this route countless times in the months after Elena and her partner, Sarah Collins, vanished, chasing every lead, checking every reported sighting. The two agents had been investigating suspected smuggling routes along the Canadian border, focusing on corridors used to move drugs and people between British Columbia and Washington state. Their last check-in had been routine, just another surveillance operation in a career full of them. The GPS led him to a gravel access road that hadn't existed 8 years ago, likely cut by the mining company for their survey work. Orange cones and D vehicles marked a makeshift command center at the cave entrance. The scene buzzed with activity. Forensics teams in white coveralls, local law enforcement maintaining a perimeter, and the grim efficiency of professionals accustomed to dealing with death. Marcus parked and approached the lead forensics investigator, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes behind safety glasses. She introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Lindstrom, Agent Rivera. I was told to expect you, she said, her voice blending professionalism with sympathy. "I want to prepare you for what we found." They walked toward a tent near the cave entrance, passing evidence markers and photography equipment. Inside, 3 body bags lay on examination tables, each tagged with preliminary identification numbers. "We've recovered 3 bodies from the cave so far," Dr. Lindstrom explained. "Using field identification procedures, we've confirmed one victim as Agent Sarah Collins through dental records and her D badge, which was still on her person." Marcus felt his throat tighten. Sarah had been Elena's partner for 3 years, a decorated agent with a young daughter waiting at home. "'Cause of death?" He asked. Dr. Lindstrom led him to a laptop displaying digital x-rays. "This is where it becomes clearly criminal. Agent Collins shows evidence of blunt force trauma to the skull injuries inconsistent with a vehicle accident or fall. The pattern suggests deliberate strikes with a heavy object. This shifts our entire investigation from missing persons to homicide." "The other 2 bodies?" Marcus pressed. "Both female, significantly decomposed. No matches in missing persons databases yet. We're running DNA and checking with Canadian authorities as well." She paused, studying his face. "Agent Rivera, I need to be clear about something. We've thoroughly searched the vehicle and immediate cave area. Agent Elena Rivera's body is not among those we've recovered." The words hit him with a mix of relief and renewed dread. If Elena wasn't in the cave with Sarah and the truck, what had happened to her? Had she escaped, only to meet her end elsewhere? Or worse, had she been taken alive? "Doctor." Lindstrom showed him the truck through the cave opening, using powerful spotlights to illuminate the cavern below. The white F-150 sat partially submerged, its D-marking still visible despite the murky water. Seeing it brought back memories of Elena proudly showing off her new assigned vehicle, joking about finally getting a truck that could handle the rough terrain of Border Patrol. "The minimal water damage is puzzling," Dr. Lindstrom continued. "This cave system floods seasonally. If the truck had been here 8 years, we'd expect significantly more deterioration. Our preliminary assessment suggests it's been here 6 months at most." Marcus scanned the recovery manifest one more time, hoping he'd missed something, that Elena's name would appear somewhere on the list. But she remained absent, a ghost who had left behind only questions and a partner's body as evidence of violence. "We're expanding the search grid," Dr. Lindstrom assured him. "If there are other remains in connected cave systems, we'll find them." But Marcus knew from 8 years of searching that some people didn't want to be found. And some secrets were worth killing to keep buried. He stared at the cave opening, wondering if Elena had looked up through that same skylight in her final moments, or if her story had continued beyond this dark hole in the earth. Either way, Sarah Collins's murder proved one thing: his sister. And her partner hadn't simply gotten lost or had an accident. They had been targeted, and their killer had gone to great lengths to hide the evidence. The Cascade Ridge Motel sat like a relic from another era, its faded neon sign flickering in the gray afternoon light. Marcus pulled into the gravel parking lot just past noon, his body heavy with exhaustion that went beyond the physical. The emotional toll of seeing Sarah Collins's body, of confronting the violent reality of what had happened to his sister's partner, pressed down on him like a weight. Director Thornton had been firm on the phone. "Take the mandatory rest period, Marcus. 4 hours minimum. That's not a request." D protocol existed for a reason. Agents who were emotionally compromised, made mistakes, missed crucial details, got themselves or others killed. He knew she was right, but every moment away from the investigation felt like a betrayal of Elena's memory. The motel room smelled of industrial cleaner and old carpet, a combination that made the space feel even more isolating. Marcus set his service weapon on the nightstand with careful precision, followed by the stack of case files he'd grabbed from his vehicle. 8 years of reports, witness statements, and dead-end leads he'd read. So many times he could recite them by heart. His hands trembled as he unscrewed the cap from a water bottle. The tremor had nothing to do with the cool mountain air or lack of food. It was pure adrenaline crash mixed with grief. Seeing that truck in the cave, knowing Sarah had died violently while Alina remained missing, had shattered the fragile comfort he'd built around uncertainty. For 8 years, he could tell himself they might have disappeared, started new lives somewhere. Now that delusion was impossible. A firm knock interrupted his solitude, 3 measured raps, authoritative, official. Through the peephole, he saw a uniformed officer, tall and broad-shouldered, graying hair visible beneath his campaign hat. Marcus opened the door, positioning his body to block the view of his weapon on the nightstand. "Can I help you?" he asked. "Agent Rivera?" "I'm Sheriff Wade Thompson, Cascade County." The man extended a large hand, his grip firm but slightly damp. "I apologize for the intrusion, but I have a time-sensitive matter regarding your sister's case." The sheriff's uniform was crisp, his badge polished, everything about his appearance screaming professional competence. Yet something in his pale blue eyes seemed off, a nervousness that didn't match his authoritative bearing. "Come in, Sheriff," Marcus said, stepping aside, noting how Thompson's gaze swept the room, lingering on the case files and weapon. Thompson removed his hat, revealing a receding hairline dark with perspiration despite the cool October weather. "I'll get straight to the point. I have a confidential informant who claims to have information about Agent Rivera your sister." Marcus's pulse quickened. "What kind of information?" "That's the complication." Thompson shifted his weight, his hand unconsciously moving toward his service weapon before dropping to his side. "This individual has had some negative experiences with federal agencies. They specifically requested to speak only with Alana's family member, not in any official DEA capacity. They're skittish, ready to run at the first sign of a formal investigation. Where is this informant now?" "That's what I'm here about. They're willing to meet, but only at a location of their choosing, somewhere private, away from any potential surveillance." Thompson's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it quickly before continuing. "I know it's irregular, but given the potential value of the information," Marcus studied the sheriff carefully. "What exactly did this informant tell you? Why come forward now after 8 years?" "The discovery at the cave has people talking," Thompson said, his words coming faster now. "Old secrets have a way of surfacing when bodies start appearing. Look, I understand your skepticism, but I was part of the original search effort. I want answers as much as you do." "I appreciate that, Sheriff. Tell me what evidence was recovered today." "I was only there briefly." Thompson leaned forward, his interest sharpening. "That's what I was hoping you could tell me. My department's been kept out of the loop, federal jurisdiction and all. Were all 3 bodies identified? Any personal effects recovered?" "2 of the victims remain unidentified. Sarah Collins was confirmed through dental records," Marcus replied. "And the vehicle?" Thompson pressed. "I heard something about it being surprisingly well preserved. The forensics team must have mentioned their timeline estimates." Warning. Bells rang in Marcus's mind. The sheriff's questions were too specific, too focused on evidence details rather than the victims. "They're still processing the scene. Why do you ask?" "Just trying to understand the full picture." Thompson wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. "And Elena, was her body among those recovered?" There was a flash of something in Thompson's eyes when Marcus shook his head. Relief? It appeared and vanished so quickly, Marcus almost doubted he'd seen it. "No, Elena wasn't in the cave," Marcus said, keeping his voice neutral, watching the sheriff's reaction. "That's..." Thompson paused, visibly collecting himself. "Well, that leaves hope she might have survived the initial incident. All the more reason to meet with my informant. Tell me, Sheriff, will the forensics team be expanding their search? Bringing in additional resources like ground-penetrating radar?" Thompson's response came too quickly, too detailed. Standard procedure would involve systematic grid expansion, cadaver dogs, GPR units for the surrounding area. The DEA will probably request thermal imaging drones, check nearby water sources, examine game trails for evidence of remains being moved by animals. They'll want to search at least a 5-mile radius from the primary scene. Marcus nodded slowly. Few county sheriffs could outline DEA evidence procedures with such precision. You seem very familiar with federal investigation protocols. I've worked with your agency before, Thompson said, but his eyes darted away. Cross-border jurisdiction issues, mostly. We need to coordinate resources. Make sure we're not duplicating efforts, of course. Marcus stood. A clear signal the conversation was ending. I'll need to clear any meeting with my supervisor first. Time is a factor here, Thompson insisted, rising as well. My informant won't wait long. They're scared, Agent Rivera. Whatever they know, it's had them looking over their shoulder for 8 years. Give me 2 hours. I'll contact you through official channels. Thompson's jaw tightened. But he nodded. 2 hours. After that, I can't guarantee they'll still be willing to talk. He moved toward the door, then paused. Agent Rivera, I know what it's like to lose someone. I had a sister too. Died in a car accident when she was 23. The not knowing that would be even worse. The words rang hollow, a performance that didn't quite reach Thompson's eyes. Marcus maintained an expression of gratitude until the door closed, then immediately moved to the window. He watched Thompson sit in his patrol car for several minutes, making what appeared to be a heated phone call before finally driving away. Every instinct Marcus had honed in 15 years with the DEA screamed danger. Thompson's specific questions, his detailed knowledge, the convenient appearance of an informant just hours after the bodies were discovered. It all formed a pattern too suspicious to ignore. But if there was even a chance the sheriff had real information about Elena, Marcus couldn't dismiss it entirely. He picked up his phone to call Director Thornton, then hesitated. Official channels meant official responses, and Thompson would be notified immediately of any federal inquiry. If the sheriff was involved somehow, alerting him would only give him time to cover his tracks. Marcus retrieved his service weapon, checking the magazine before holstering it. Whatever Thompson's real agenda, one thing was clear. The sheriff knew more about Elena's disappearance than any uninvolved local lawman should. And his barely concealed relief at learning Elena's body wasn't in the cave suggested that knowledge was worth protecting. The DEA field office occupied the 15th floor of a federal building in downtown Seattle, its windows offering a panoramic view of Elliott Bay that Marcus barely noticed as he badged through security at 2 p.m. His mind churned with the implications of Thompson's visit, replaying every micro-expression, every too-specific question. Every moment of barely concealed relief when he learned Elena's body hadn't been found. The archive room hummed with the white noise of climate control systems, designed to preserve decades of case files. Marcus pulled up the digital records first, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he accessed the original missing persons report, the one he'd filed himself 8 years ago when Elena failed to check in after 48 hours. Reading his own words brought back the raw panic of those first days, the gradual shift from concern to desperation as hours became days, became weeks. But it was Sheriff Thompson's contributions to the investigation that drew his attention now, his suspicions crystallizing with each paragraph. Based on my extensive knowledge of local terrain, Thompson had written, I recommend focusing search efforts on the following sectors. What followed was a carefully constructed search grid that, Marcus now realized, created a corridor of unsearched territory along the Canadian border. Thompson had justified each exclusion with reasonable-sounding explanations. This area was too steep for vehicle access. That section flooded seasonally. Another zone was fenced private property with security that would have reported any intrusion. Marcus pulled up satellite imagery from 8 years ago, comparing it to Thompson's recommendations. The impassable terrain showed clear evidence of trails. The flooded sections were bone-dry in the images from that October, and the secured, private property appeared to be abandoned structures with no visible fencing or security. Measures. He dug deeper into the supplemental files, finding a report that made his blood run cold. James Carver, a game warden with 30 years' experience in these woods, had filed a contradictory assessment just 2 days after Thompson's. Carver noted well-established paths through sectors 7 and 9, the exact areas Thompson had declared impassable. The warden had even mentioned recent vehicle tracks inconsistent with logging operations near the cave system. Yet somehow, Carver's report had been buried in supplemental files, never integrated into the main investigation. Marcus's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up missing persons databases for Cascade County and surrounding jurisdictions. He set parameters for the past decade, focusing on Thompson's patrol areas. The results made him lean back in his chair, a chill running down his spine. 17 missing persons cases along Thompson's regular patrol routes. The state average for similar rural areas was 4 to 5 over the same period. The victims showed a disturbing pattern, mostly young women, many of them immigrants or traveling alone people whose disappearances might not trigger immediate large-scale searches. Maria Gonzalez, 28, an undocumented immigrant last seen hitchhiking near the border. Ashley Chen, 19, a college student whose car broke down on Highway 20. Natasha Volkov, 24, a Russian tourist who vanished during a solo hiking trip. Case after case, all bearing Thompson's assessment signature. Likely voluntary disappearance. Probable border crossing to avoid immigration enforcement. No evidence of foul play. The sheriff had effectively shut down deeper investigations with his authoritative reports, and jurisdictional complexities meant federal agencies rarely second-guessed local law enforcement assessments. Marcus accessed the shared law enforcement database using his federal credentials to pull Thompson's duty logs from October 8 years ago. The official record showed routine patrols, nothing out of the ordinary. But when Marcus cross-referenced with fuel receipts from the county motor pool, a glaring discrepancy emerged. Thompson's logged patrols should have consumed approximately 80 miles worth of fuel. The receipt showed he'd burned through enough gas for 240 miles, triple the distance. Where had Thompson driven that night? The answer came from an unexpected source. Buried in the supplemental files of the original investigation, Marcus found raw cell tower data that had been collected but apparently never analyzed. In the chaos of a multi-agency search operation, it seemed no one had thought to check where Thompson's phone had been pinging. Marcus ran the data through mapping software, watching as Thompson's movements painted a damning picture. At 11:47 p.m., approximately 2 hours after Elena's last check-in, Thompson's phone pinned a tower near the cave system, the same cave where the truck had just been found. He remained in that area for over an hour, his phone connecting to towers in a pattern consistent with someone moving around the location, not just driving through. Then, at 2:15 a.m., the signals showed him heading north toward the Canadian border before eventually returning to town. The sheriff had been at the crime scene the night Elena and Sarah disappeared. He'd spent considerable time there, hours before any missing persons report was filed, before anyone except their killer should have known something was wrong. Marcus felt the weight of the evidence settling on his shoulders. A corrupt sheriff, strategically positioned to facilitate smuggling operations, systematically covering up disappearances, quite possibly involved in the murder of 2 federal agents. But knowing and proving were different things, especially when accusing a fellow law enforcement officer. He understood with crystal clarity why he couldn't report this through official channels. The law enforcement community was tightly interconnected. Any inquiry into Thompson would trigger immediate alerts through the system. The sheriff would know within minutes that he was under investigation. Evidence would disappear. Witnesses would vanish or recant, and any chance of finding out what really happened to Elena would evaporate. Marcus began methodically copying files to an encrypted external drive, financial records showing Thompson living well beyond a county sheriff's salary, property records indicating he owned 3 rental houses and a boat, all purchased with cash over the past 6 years, travel records showing frequent trips to Vancouver and Seattle, always returning through remote border crossings rather than official ports of entry. The picture that emerged was of a man who'd been corrupted years ago, who'd turned his position into a profitable enterprise built on human misery. But had he graduated from facilitating smuggling to murder? Had Elena and Sarah discovered his operation, forcing him to eliminate them? Marcus saved the final files as his phone buzzed. Thompson, texting from his personal number. Informant agreed to meet. 5 p.m. Old Brackenridge Mill off Forest Road, 47. Come alone or they won't show. The location was perfect for an ambush, isolated, with only one access road, no cell coverage. If Thompson wanted to eliminate a federal agent who was getting too close to the truth, he couldn't have chosen better. But it was also exactly the kind of place where Elena might have been held, might have died, might still be waiting to be found. Marcus closed the files and pocketed the encrypted drive. He had 4 pieces of damning evidence: Thompson's presence at the crime scene, his systematic misdirection of search efforts, the pattern of disappearances in his jurisdiction, and his inexplicable wealth. It wasn't enough for a conviction, maybe not even for an arrest, but it was enough to know he was dealing with a killer. The question now was whether he could use that knowledge to find Elena without becoming Thompson's next victim. The paperwork at the DEA motor pool took less than 5 minutes, but to Marcus, every second felt like an eternity. He selected a gray Honda Accord with tinted windows and civilian plates, the kind of vehicle that would blend into traffic without drawing a second glance. His hands remained steady as he signed the checkout form, but his mind raced with the implications of what he'd discovered in the archives. At 3:25 p.m. Marcus positioned himself across from the Cascade County Sheriff's Office, engine running, air conditioning on low to prevent the windows from fogging. He'd changed into civilian clothes, jeans, a mariner's jacket, and a baseball cap that shadowed his face. The encrypted drive with Thompson's files sat in his inner pocket, a digital insurance policy he hoped he wouldn't need. Thompson emerged from the building at 3:32 p.m., his body language different from the nervous energy he'd displayed at the motel. Now he moved with purpose, scanning the parking lot with the practiced sweep of someone who expected surveillance. Marcus let 2 cars pull out before following, maintaining a 3-vehicle buffer as they navigated through town. The sheriff's patrol car turned north onto Highway 20, then quickly diverged onto a series of increasingly remote logging roads. Marcus's suspicions solidified as Thompson executed a textbook surveillance detection route: unnecessary turns, speed variations, pulling to the shoulder to force following vehicles to pass. Twice, Marcus had to take parallel roads, using his knowledge of the terrain to predict Thompson's route and reacquire visual contact. The dance continued for 20 minutes, Thompson's patrol car kicking up dust clouds on the gravel roads. That forced Marcus to hang back even further. The sheriff was heading toward the Canadian border, into the same wilderness where Elena and Sarah had vanished. Dense stands of Douglas fir and western hemlock pressed close to the road, their shadows creating a premature twilight beneath the canopy. Thompson finally turned onto a rutted access road marked only by a rusted chain that had been recently cut. Marcus couldn't follow without being spotted, so he continued past, finding a concealed turnout a quarter-mile ahead. He grabbed his binoculars and phone, then moved through the forest on foot, using game trails to circle back toward Thompson's destination. The trees opened onto a clearing dominated by the skeletal remains of the Brackenridge lumber mill. Abandoned since the spotted owl controversies of the 1990s, But the site showed signs of recent activity. Fresh tire tracks crisscrossed the packed earth. New padlocks gleamed on the gate, and security cameras had been mounted on poles. Someone had repurposed this remote location for activities that required privacy. Marcus found an elevated position behind a massive fallen cedar, the natural blind offering clear sight lines while keeping him concealed. Through his binoculars, he watched Thompson park near a cluster of vehicles, 2 pickup trucks, and a van with British Columbia plates. The sheriff checked his weapon before approaching 3 men who emerged from the mill's main building. Recognition hit Marcus like a physical blow. He knew these faces from DEA intelligence briefings. Victor Clauve, suspected of running drugs through the border forests. Chun Wei, linked to human trafficking operations. And Robert Bobby Tanner, a local who'd been questioned but never charged in multiple smuggling cases. These were the men who always seemed to slip through law enforcement nets, who always knew exactly when and where to avoid patrols. Now Marcus understood why Thompson greeted the men with familiar ease, accepting backslaps and handshakes like old friends. Clauve produced a thick manila envelope from his jacket, which Thompson accepted without hesitation. The sheriff's back was to Marcus as he counted the contents, but his body language suggested satisfaction with the payment. Marcus managed to capture several photos with his phone's zoom. The digital evidence grainy but clear enough to identify all parties. The wind shifted, carrying fragments of conversation across the clearing. Marcus strained to hear, catching pieces that made his blood run cold. Increased federal presence since the cave discovery, Thompson was saying. They'll expand the search grid within days. Then we move everything tonight, Clauve replied, his accent thick but understandable. The northern warehouse first. Chun Wei gestured angrily. This is too fast. We have product in transit. Buyers expecting delivery. Would you rather explain to buyers or to federal agents? Thompson interrupted. I'll handle the cleanup at the northern site, same as I did 8 years ago. The casual reference to 8 years ago when Elena disappeared sent ice through Marcus's veins. He forced himself to remain still, to keep recording despite the rage building in his chest. What about the bodies in the cave? Tanner asked nervously. If they identify the other 2, they won't, Thompson said firmly. Maria and her daughter aren't in any databases that matter, just 2 more illegals who disappeared crossing the border. Maria and her daughter. Marcus filed the names away, thinking of the 2 unidentified bodies in the cave victims who now had names. If not Justice. Thompson pulled out his phone, dialing a number. Yeah, it's me. We have a problem. The Rivera brother is asking questions. Marcus's name on the sheriff's lips felt like a target being painted on his back. He was too interested in the evidence, asking about expansion of the search area. How much do you think the DEA really knows about what happened to his sister? The response was inaudible, but Thompson's next words carried clearly. He might be a problem that needs addressing. He's staying at the Cascade Ridge. Room 12. Clauve grabbed Thompson's arm. No more federal agents. You killed 2, and look where we are now. I kept us safe for 8 years, Thompson snarled. If Rivera keeps digging, he'll find the northern site, then we're all finished. Then we clear it tonight, Chun Wei said decisively. Everything: product, equipment, records. Burn what we can't move. And the merchandise? Tanner asked. Marcus realized with growing horror that merchandise meant people trafficking victims. Move them through the usual corridor, Thompson said. I'll make sure patrol units are elsewhere. We have maybe 6 hours before Rivera can mobilize any real search. The meeting began to break up, the men moving toward their vehicles with the efficiency of a well-practiced operation. Marcus carefully retreated through the forest, his mind racing. He'd found the conspiracy. A sheriff corrupted into facilitating drug and human trafficking, who'd murdered federal agents to protect the operation. But now they knew he was a threat. and they were accelerating their timeline. The northern site Thompson mentioned, was that where Elena had been held? Where she might have died. The reference to cleaning it up like 8 years ago suggested Thompson had disposed of evidence before, possibly Elena herself. Marcus reached his vehicle and immediately checked for surveillance or tracking. Devices of precaution that now seemed prudent rather than paranoid. Finding nothing, he started the engine and drove carefully back toward town, using a different route than his approach. His phone showed no signal, as expected in these remote areas, preventing him from calling for backup. The dashboard clock read 4:47 p.m. Thompson had promised to meet him with an informant at 5 p.m. Obviously a trap now. The sheriff would expect him to show up, would be waiting with his smuggling partners to eliminate another federal agent who'd gotten too close to the truth. But Marcus had evidence now: photos, names, locations. More importantly, he knew about the northern warehouse and the planned evacuation tonight. If trafficking victims were being held there, if evidence about Elena's fate existed at that site, he had only hours to act. The weight of his service weapon felt reassuring against his ribs, but Marcus knew he was outgunned and outnumbered. Thompson had the advantage of knowing the terrain, having allies, and operating outside the law. Marcus had only his training, his determination, and the hope that somewhere in that northern warehouse he might finally find answers about his sister's fate. Marcus's hands shook as he fumbled for his phone, still processing what he'd witnessed at the lumber mill. Agent David Chun answered on the second ring, his voice immediately sharpening at Marcus's tone. "David, I need backup at my location. Full tactical team, highest priority." "Marcus, what's your situation?" "Sheriff Wade Thompson is dirty. I've got photographic evidence of him meeting with known smugglers taking payoffs. They mentioned Elena. David, they're planning to clear out a warehouse tonight, moving trafficking victims." "Jesus Christ, where are you exactly?" Marcus rattled off his GPS coordinates, adding, "I'm about 40 miles northeast of Cascade Ridge, near the old Bracken Ridge Mill." Thompson's still on site with 3 suspects: Victor Clav, Chun Wei, and Robert Tanner. "I know those names. We've been after them for years." Chun's voice carried the weight of understanding. "I can mobilize a team, but Marcus, you're in the middle of nowhere. It'll take at least an hour to reach you, maybe more." "An hour?" Marcus's heart sank. In an hour, evidence could be destroyed, victims moved, and any trace of Elena's fate erased forever. That's pushing it hard. "I'll scramble everyone available. But Marcus, do not engage alone. You're outnumbered and outgunned." Through his binoculars, Marcus watched Thompson stride urgently toward his patrol vehicle. The sheriff's entire demeanor had changed. Gone was the calculated calm from the meeting. Now he moved with barely controlled panic, yanking open a concealed compartment behind the rear seat of his cruiser. "David, he's on the move." Thompson's pulling items from a hidden compartment. Marcus focused the binoculars, his breath catching as he cataloged what Thompson was extracting. Stacks of documents went into a duffel bag, followed by what looked like bundles of cash wrapped in plastic. Then came the weapons, a tactical shotgun and what appeared to be an AR-15, both non-standard for a county sheriff. "He's got an exit strategy prepared," Marcus reported. "Documents, cash, heavy weapons. This isn't spontaneous. He's had a bug-out bag ready." "Which means he always knew this day might come," Chun said grimly. "Marcus, fall back. Wait for the team." But even as Chun spoke, Thompson's phone rang. Through the binoculars, Marcus watched the sheriff's face contort with rage. Thompson gestured wildly, shouting something inaudible, then slammed his phone against the patrol car's hood. Whatever news he'd received had shattered his composure entirely. Thompson threw the duffel bag into his vehicle and peeled out, gravel spraying as he accelerated down a Forest Service road leading deeper into the wilderness. "He's running," Marcus said, already moving toward his Honda, heading north on a service road deeper into the forest. Marcus, don't. David, he mentioned cleaning up a northern site like he did 8 years ago. He knows where Elena is. This might be my only chance. God damn it. Chun's frustration carried clearly through the phone. Keep your phone on. I'll track your GPS as long as you have signal. The team will follow your trail. Marcus started the Honda, pulling onto the service road at a distance that would keep Thompson's dust cloud visible without revealing his pursuit. The sheriff was driving recklessly, taking curves at dangerous speeds, his patrol car's heavier frame swaying dangerously on the gravel surface. The route felt familiar, and Marcus realized why. Thompson was following the old smuggling trails he'd studied in the case files, paths that predated modern roads and led to remote border crossings. These were the same routes Elena and Sarah had been investigating 8 years ago. He's heading toward the sectors he marked as impassable during the original search. Marcus reported to Chun. The areas he steered us away from. Those bastards, Chun muttered. Update me every few minutes while you have signal. But as they climbed higher into the mountains, Marcus watched his phone signal bars drop one by one. The dense forest and mountainous terrain created dead zones that modern technology couldn't penetrate. He managed one final update before losing connection entirely. David, I'm on Forest Road 347, heading north toward grid reference. He rattled off the coordinates he'd memorized from the old search maps. These are the areas Thompson declared thoroughly searched. If you lose me, start here. Marcus, Chun's voice crackled and died as the signal vanished. Now, truly alone, Marcus continued his pursuit as the sun sank lower, painting the forest in deep oranges and shadows. Thompson's driving had become even more erratic, his patrol car fishtailing on loose gravel, branches scraping against its sides as he barely stayed on the narrow road. After another 15 minutes of winding through increasingly dense forest, Thompson's brake lights flared ahead. Marcus immediately killed his headlights, coasting to a stop behind a thick stand of pines. He grabbed his tactical flashlight and extra magazines, checking his service weapon one more time before exiting the vehicle. The forest felt alive with small sounds. Wind through pine needles, distant bird calls, the crack of cooling metal from Thompson's engine. Marcus moved carefully through the underbrush, using skills honed in DEA tactical training to remain silent on the forest floor. The trees opened into a small clearing, barely visible in the fading twilight. Thompson's patrol car sat askew. Driver's door open, interior light creating a small pool of illumination. The sheriff himself stood 20 feet away at a patch of ground that looked different from the chiefrant, surrounding forest floor. The earth was slightly depressed, vegetation younger and sparser than the established growth around it. Thompson had retrieved a shovel from his trunk and was digging frantically, throwing soil aside with desperate energy. His voice carried in the still air, a stream of panicked muttering. Should have moved her years ago. Knew this would happen. Can't let them find this site. Evidence still here. Stupid to keep it so close. Marcus felt his heart constrict. Thompson was digging up Elena's grave, drawing his Glock. Marcus stepped into the clearing. Drop the shovel, Thompson. Hands where I can see them. The sheriff spun, his hand moving toward his holstered weapon. Marcus had already anticipated the move, his weapon trained center mass. Don't, Marcus. Warned. It's over, Wade. Drop the shovel and step away from the grave. Thompson's face was streaked with sweat and dirt, his eyes wild in the dying light. But instead of complying, he laughed a broken sound that held no humor. The grave? You think this is her grave? Thompson shook his head. Jesus, Rivera, you really don't understand what your sister stumbled into. Then explain it to me. Marcus kept his weapon steady despite the tremor in his voice. Tell me what happened to Elena. Thompson let the shovel fall but kept his hand near his weapon. She was supposed to be routine surveillance, just another federal agent checking smuggling routes, filing reports no one would read. But Alina, she was too good at her job, too persistent. "Keep talking," Marcus said, feeling the weight of the moment. Knowing he was finally about to learn the truth, she found the transfer point by accident. We were moving a shipment, drugs and girls, the usual run. Sarah Collins tried to call it in immediately, went for her radio. Thompson's voice turned cold. Clav shot her before she could say a word. Clean shot to the head. She died instantly. And Elena? Elena was smarter. She tried to retreat, to get back to their vehicle, but we couldn't let her go. Not after what she'd seen. The operation was too valuable. Millions in drugs. Dozens of girls moved through our corridor every year. Thompson wiped sweat from his forehead with a dirty hand. The bosses wanted her alive. They needed to know what the DEA knew, who else was investigating, how much time we had before more agents came. Marcus's grip on his weapon tightened. "You tortured her for 2 months. Thompson's admission came out flat, matter of fact. Kept her in a shipping container we'd converted into cells for the difficult merchandise. The bosses brought in a specialist, someone who knew how to break people without killing them. But your sister?" He shook his head with something almost like admiration. "Elena was tougher than anyone expected." "Tell me everything," Marcus's voice cracked. "She deserves to have her story told." Thompson glanced at the hole he'd been digging, then back at Marcus. "She escaped twice. First time, she made it almost a mile through the forest before the dogs caught her, left scratches on trees, tried to create a trail. We had to move the entire operation after that. Couldn't risk her markers being found." "The sheriff's." Hand hinged toward his weapon as he continued. "Second time, she actually managed to hide evidence photos, documents she'd stolen, a bloody piece of her shirt with a note. Buried it all in a cache she marked. That's what I'm digging up, not her body, but her final screw you to us. If the feds expand their search grid, they'll find it eventually." "Where is she, Thompson? Where's Elena's body?" "You want to know how she died?" Thompson's desperation morphed into cruelty. "When she finally broke after weeks of interrogation, you know what information she gave us. Badge numbers from 5 years ago, outdated radio frequencies, patrol. Schedules that had changed 3 times since her capture. She played us, fed us worthless intel to buy time, hoping someone would find her." Marcus heard engines in the distance, still faint but growing closer. Thompson heard them too, his panic returning. "We realized she'd never give us anything useful. The specialist wanted to sell her, said she'd bring good money in certain markets. A federal agent as a trophy. But she'd seen too many faces, knew too much. So I handled it myself." Thompson's voice dropped. "1 shot, back of the head. Same as her partner. She died brave, if that matters. Never begged, never stopped fighting." "Where is her body?" Marcus demanded, his vision blurring with tears he couldn't afford to shed yet. Thompson smiled coldly. "Where do you think? We had a crematorium for problems like her. No body, no evidence, no closure for families who ask too many questions. Your sister's been dead. Rivera has been for 8 years." The sound of approaching vehicles grew louder. Thompson's hand moved for his weapon, using Marcus's moment of grief as a distraction. But the forest around them suddenly came alive with movement. 2 men emerged from the trees. Marcus recognized them from the mill, armed with rifles and moving to flank him. "Drop the weapon, Fed," one commanded. Marcus tried to swing his Glock toward the new threat, but a rifle butt caught him in the temple. Stars exploded across his vision as he fell to his knees. His weapon was kicked away as hands roughly searched him, taking his phone, wallet, and backup magazine. Through blurred vision, Marcus saw Thompson standing over him, his service weapon drawn. "You should have left this alone, Rivera. You could have lived with uncertainty. Now you'll die just like your sister did, fighting for nothing, saving no one." The darkness rushing up to meet Marcus felt almost merciful compared to the weight of Thompson's revelations. Elena had suffered for 2 months, had fought and planned and tried to leave evidence, had died alone, cremated to ash, erased from the world except in the memories of her killers. As consciousness faded, Marcus heard Thompson organizing the men, preparing to move him somewhere else for disposal. But he also heard something else, engines growing louder, closer than Thompson realized. Chun's team, following his trail, racing against time, just as Marcus had. The last thing he registered before darkness claimed him was Thompson's curse of recognition, the sheriff finally understanding that Marcus hadn't come alone after all. Consciousness returned in waves, each one bringing fresh pain from the rifle strike to Marcus's temple. The world swayed and bounced, accompanied by the rumble of an engine and the smell of motor oil and acrid sweat. He was in the back of a van, hands zip-tied behind him, shoulder pressed against cold metal flooring that vibrated with every pothole. Through his clearing vision, Marcus could make out 2 other figures, the men who'd ambushed him in the clearing. They sat on wheel wells, rifles across their laps, discussing logistics in a mixture of English and Russian, despite the throbbing in his skull. Marcus forced himself to focus, to observe, to remember. His DEA training kicked in, even through the pain. Memorize everything. Survive now. Testify later. The van took a sharp left turn, and through the windshield, Marcus glimpsed a rusted water tower, its faded letters reading Cascade Lumber Company. Another turn revealed a bridge over a creek, the old wooden structure groaning under the van's weight. 20 minutes of careful observation gave him a mental map of landmarks: a burned-out gas station, a distinctive rock formation, a cell tower on a distant ridge, breadcrumbs that might lead rescuers to him, assuming he lived long enough to share them. The warehouse complex materialized from the forest, like a cancer of corrugated metal and broken concrete. What had once been a thriving lumber processing facility now served a darker purpose. Fresh tire tracks crisscrossed older ones in the dirt. Security cameras on new posts covered every approach. The windows were painted black from the inside. And Marcus noticed air conditioning units, unusual for an abandoned building, but necessary for storing certain drugs and keeping human cargo from suffocating. They dragged him from the van, his legs unsteady from the head injury. The main warehouse door opened to reveal a scene from Marcus's worst nightmares. The acrid stench hid first human waste, unwashed bodies, fear sweat, and something chemical underneath it all. Industrial lighting illuminated a space divided by chain-link fencing into makeshift cells. Each cage held multiple victims, mostly young women and teenage girls, some barely older than children. They huddled together on thin mattresses, many showing bruises, torn clothing, the hollow-eyed look of those who'd learned that screaming brought only punishment. Madre de Dios, one girl whispered, pressing against the fencing as they dragged Marcus past. Others shrank back, conditioned to fear any new arrival as a potential customer or tormentor. Along the far wall, Marcus counted at least 50 kilos of what looked like heroin in vacuum-sealed packages, plus boxes marked with pharmaceutical symbols that likely contained fentanyl. A sophisticated drug packaging station occupied one corner, complete with industrial presses and scales. This wasn't just human trafficking, it was a full-scale criminal enterprise, where human beings were just another commodity to be bought, sold, and discarded. Thompson was already there, engaged in a heated discussion with a man Marcus recognized as Victor Klov. The Russian gestured angrily at Marcus, his accented English carrying across the warehouse. "This is insane, Thompson. A federal agent? You bring a federal agent here." "We had no choice," Thompson shot back. "He was at the burial site. He knows about Elena Rivera, about the whole operation. Then we kill him now. Dump the body across the border. Let the Canadians deal with it." "Wait," a new voice interrupted. Shun Wei emerged from an office area, his expression calculating. "First, we find out what he knows, who he told. If a D team is coming, We need to know how much time we have." Marcus was shoved into a reinforced storage room, little more than a closet with a heavy door. His phone, weapon, badge, and wallet were stripped away, tossed carelessly onto a desk outside. They left his hands zip-tied, apparently confident that the door and guard would be sufficient. Through the door's small window, Marcus could see them arguing. Thompson wanted to execute him immediately and flee. Claude worried about their merchandise. Moving dozens of victims across the border would take hours. Shun Wei seemed focused on extracting information, mentioning something about enhanced interrogation that made Marcus's blood run cold. The guard posted outside looked barely 20, nervous sweat beading on his forehead as he clutched in a K-47 knockoff. Marcus watched him through the window, noting how he kept checking his phone, how his attention wandered to the activity in the main warehouse where others were preparing vehicles and victims for transport. Time was critical. Chun's team would reach the burial site, find Thompson's abandoned car and signs of struggle. But without GPS coordinates, they have to search dozens of possible locations. The young guard stepped away, called to help. Load victims into a transport truck. This was Marcus's chance. The storage room had metal shelving units, and Marcus found what he needed, a bracket with a sharp edge where the paint had chipped away. He worked his zip ties against it, feeling plastic bite into his wrists, blood making his hands slippery. The pain was excruciating but necessary. After 5 minutes of sawing, the ties finally parted. Marcus quickly scanned the room for weapons, but found only cleaning supplies and old paperwork. Through the window, he could see the guard's jacket hanging on a chair, his phone visible. In the pocket, the main warehouse bustled with activity as traffickers prepared for evacuation, their attention focused on logistics rather than their prisoner. Moving silently, Marcus eased the door open. The jacket was 3 feet away. He grabbed the phone, powered it on, and dialed Chun's number from memory. 1 ring, 2. The guard was returning, talking to another trafficker. "Chun," the familiar voice answered. "Warehouse trafficking victims." "GPS on this phone," Marcus whispered urgently, hearing footsteps approaching. Multiple hostages, heavy weapons. The guard rounded the corner, his eyes widening in shock at seeing Marcus free with his phone. Training took over. Marcus grabbed a metal pipe from the shelving unit and swung hard, catching the young man across the temple. The guard crumpled, his weapon clattering on concrete. Marcus snatched the AK-47, checking the magazine full, safety off. Amateur hour. He could hear shouting from the main warehouse, someone calling for the guard. Through the doorway, he could see traffickers herding victims toward transport vehicles, preparing to execute their evacuation plan. The math was brutal. 1 federal agent with a borrowed weapon against at least 6 armed traffickers, with dozens of innocent lives in the balance. But Marcus also heard something else distant, but growing closer. Engines. Multiple vehicles approaching fast without sirens. Chun's tactical team running dark and silent. A trafficker appeared in the doorway, reaching for his sidearm. Marcus fired a controlled burst, dropping him before ducking back into cover. The warehouse erupted in shouts and movement. "Federal agent," Marcus yelled. "Drop your weapons." The response was automatic weapons fire that shredded the doorframe above his head. But his announcement had the intended effect: pandemonium. Some traffickers ran for exits. Others took defensive positions, and crucially, they stopped loading victims into vehicles. Marcus moved toward the cages, keeping low. A teenage girl, maybe 16, was pressed against the chain link, tears streaming down her face. "Por favor, ayúdanos," she begged. "Stay down," Marcus ordered in Spanish. "Help is coming. Everyone, get low, away from the walls." Thompson's voice boomed across the warehouse. "Rivera, you just signed their death warrants. We'll kill every witness before your backup arrives." Marcus saw Claude moving toward the cages with his rifle raised. ready to execute the witnesses. Without hesitation, Marcus broke cover, firing as he moved. His burst caught Claude in the shoulder, spinning him around. Return fire forced Marcus behind a concrete pillar, chips of cement stinging his face. The warehouse's main door exploded inward. Federal agents. The tactical team poured in, weapons trained, moving with practiced precision. The traffickers, caught between Marcus and the team, made desperate choices. Some surrendered immediately, dropping weapons and raising hands. Others chose to fight. The air filled with cordite and thunder. Marcus stayed low, trying to cover the victim's area. He saw Chun Wei attempting to flank the tactical team and fired, forcing him back. Then burning pain lanced through Marcus's left arm, a through and through. That spun him sideways. Through the chaos, he saw a trafficker raising his weapon toward the cages, toward a young girl who couldn't have been more than 14. Without thinking, Marcus threw himself forward, shielding her with his body as the weapon fired. He felt the impact in his vest, bruising ribs but stopping penetration. Clear. Suspect down. Medic. The tactical team's calls indicated the fight was ending. Marcus stayed positioned over the girl until he heard Chun's voice directly. Above him, Jesus Marcus, you're hit. The victims? Marcus gasped, rolling aside. Check the victims first. The girl he'd shielded was sobbing, clutching his good hand with both of hers, whispering, Gracias, over and over. Around them, federal agents were cutting locks, opening cages, calling for additional medical support. The warehouse that had been a chamber of horrors was transforming into a rescue operation. Thompson was on the ground in cuffs, blood seeping from a leg wound. Claude was unconscious, being treated by medics. Chun Wei hadn't survived the firefight. In total, 3 traffickers were dead, 4 in custody. More importantly, Marcus counted 32 victims being led to safety, 32 lives that would continue because Elena's investigation, even in death, had finally borne fruit. As a medic worked on his arm, Marcus watched the victims being wrapped in blankets, given water, treated with the dignity they'd been denied. Some were looking around in disbelief, unable to process that their nightmare was ending. Others wept with relief or sat in shocked silence. This is just one sight, Thompson said from where he lay, his voice bitter. You have no idea how deep this goes. How many more? Then you'd better start talking, Chun interrupted, standing over him. Because your only chance at avoiding a death sentence is full cooperation. Marcus closed his eyes, letting the medic work. They'd saved these victims, stopped this operation, but Elena was still gone. Still, he could almost hear his sister's voice in the warehouse, see her fierce determination in the rescued girl's surviving eyes. She would have been proud of this moment, even if she couldn't share it. The warehouse resembled a battlefield. Triage center, paramedics moving between victims with practiced efficiency, while federal agents processed the scene. Marcus sat on the tailgate of an ambulance, grimacing as a medic cleaned and bandaged his arm wound. The bullet had passed clean through the tricep, painful, but not debilitating. Around him, rescued victims were being treated, interviewed, comforted. Some would be reunited with families who'd given up hope. Others had no one to return to, their lives forever altered by the horror they'd endured. Sir, we really need to transport you for proper treatment, the paramedic insisted, preparing an IV line. You've lost blood, possible concussion. From the head trauma. No, Marcus's voice came out raw, broken. Not yet. Chun approached, understanding written on his face. He'd coordinated enough operations to recognize when an agent needed closure more than medical care. The forensics team is mobilizing to return to the burial site. Dr. Lindstrom is already en route with ground-penetrating radar. Thompson said she wasn't there, said they cremated her. The words tasted like ash in Marcus's mouth. Thompson says a lot of things, Chun replied gently, but he was digging for something. Let's find out what. The paramedic looked between Frustration evident. Chen negotiated a compromise. Field medics would accompany them. Marcus would accept basic treatment during transport, and he'd submit to a full examination after the site investigation. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than watching Marcus try to drive himself with one functioning arm and a concussion. The convoy moved through the darkness, tactical vehicles, forensics vans, ambulances carrying the most traumatized victims to hospitals. Thompson rode in an armored transport, his leg wound treated, his rights read, his career and freedom conclusively ended. 2 other surviving traffickers were separated into different vehicles to prevent coordination of stories. Marcus rode with Chun, a medic monitoring his vitals while he stared out at the dark forest. Every mile brought them closer to answers he both craved and dreaded. The clearing looked different in the harsh illumination of portable spotlights. Thompson's patrol car remained where he'd abandoned it, the half-dug hole, a dark wound in the earth. Dr. Lindstrom was already directing the setup of equipment, her team moving with careful precision. "Agent Rivera, you should be in a hospital," she said, after Marcus said simply, "Please." She nodded, understanding the weight of the moment. "We're detecting metallic objects approximately 4 feet down, consistent with tactical gear. The soil disturbance pattern suggests burial approximately 8 years ago, not cremated, not destroyed." Thompson had lied about that final detail, perhaps the only mercy in a night of revelations. Marcus watched, supported by Chun, as the forensics team began careful excavation. Layer by layer, the earth gave up its secrets. The first discovery was a tactical vest, D letters still visible despite years underground. Then, with infinite care, the remains of Special Agent Elena Rivera were revealed to the night air. Marcus fell to his knees beside the grave, his injured arm forgotten, tears flowing freely as he looked upon what remained of his sister. "Elena," he whispered, reaching out with his good hand but not quite touching. "I'm sorry it took so long. I'm so sorry." Dr. Lindstrom crouched beside him, her professional demeanor softened by compassion. "The skeletal evidence confirms prolonged captivity, healed fractures consistent with torture, defensive wounds on the hands. But Marcus, look here." She indicated marks on the ribs. "Single gunshot wound to the back of the head. It would have been instantaneous, a small mercy in an ocean of cruelty. When they finally decided to kill her, at least it had been quick." Chun's phone buzzed. "Thompson's talking. Says he wants to make a deal." "No deals," Marcus said harshly. "He's offering locations of other burial sites, names of corrupted officials, the full network. The prosecutor will make that call, not us." Chun paused. "But Marcus, he's also explaining about Elena, about what she hid." The excavation continued, and beneath Elena's remains, they found what Thompson had been desperate to recover, a plastic-wrapped bundle, preserved against the elements. Inside were photographs of the trafficking operation, documents stolen from Thompson's office, and a blood-stained piece of fabric with Elena's handwriting. "Elena Rivera, DEA Special Agent, badge number 3847. Taken alive October 15th. Sarah. Collins murdered at scene. Sheriff Wade Thompson involved. Trafficking operation warehouse 3 miles north of Bracken Ridge Mill. They're moving people and drugs. Please tell Marcus I fought. Tell him I never gave them anything real. Tell him I'm sorry." Marcus clutched the note, his sister's last words breaking something inside him. She'd apologized after enduring 2 months of torture, maintaining operational security, gathering evidence even while captive. She'd apologized as if she'd failed somehow. As if her extraordinary courage wasn't enough, she saved them, Marcus said, looking at the note, then at the lights of ambulances carrying victims to safety. 32 people are alive tonight because she never gave up. Thompson's full confession came over the next hours, delivered from his hospital bed as part of a desperate attempt to avoid the death penalty. The trafficking ring had operated For over a decade, moving drugs south and people north, using law enforcement intelligence to avoid detection. Thompson had been recruited early, his gambling debts making him vulnerable to corruption. Elena Rivera was never supposed to be there, Thompson admitted to federal prosecutors. She deviated from her assigned patrol route, following a hunch, found our transfer site by accident. Collins went for her radio immediately. Clove didn't hesitate, but Rivera she tried to retreat, to de-escalate, professional to the end. The interrogation revealed the full scope. 2 other corrupted officials in Border Patrol. A network of safe houses, routes that shifted based on law enforcement patterns Thompson provided. The 2 unidentified bodies in the cave were confirmed as Maria Gonzalez and her 9-year-old daughter Ana, who died from intentional overdoses when they tried to escape during transport. We dumped the truck 6 months ago, Thompson explained. The original hiding spot was being developed, construction crews getting too close. Figured the cave would hold it until we could destroy it properly. 5 additional burial sites were revealed, each containing victims who'd resisted or become liabilities. Families who'd waited years for news would finally have answers, bodies to bury. Some measure of closure. As dawn broke over the forest, Elena's remains were carefully removed for proper burial. Marcus stood vigil throughout, speaking quietly to his sister, updating her on their parents, on the lives she'd saved, on how her sacrifice had meaning. The medics periodically checked his vitals, concerned about shock and blood loss, but understood this vigil was as necessary as any medical treatment. You ready? Chun asked gently as the coroner's van prepared to depart. Marcus took one last look at the clearing where his sister had been hidden for 8 years, where she'd used her final moments of control to hide evidence that would eventually destroy her killers. Where Thompson had thought darkness and earth could bury truth forever. She fought, Marcus said, Elena's note carefully folded in his pocket. Even at the end, even when she knew she would die, she fought to leave something behind to save others. He finally accepted the paramedics' ministrations, letting them guide him to an ambulance. As they drove toward the hospital, Marcus watched the sun rise over the Washington forest, painting the trees in gold and shadow. Somewhere behind them, crime scene tape marked places of horror. Ahead, 32 survivors were beginning their journey back to lives interrupted. Elena was gone, had been gone for 8 years, but her determination to protect and serve had outlived her body. Had waited, buried in dirt and darkness, until her little brother could finish what she'd started. Thompson would die in prison. The trafficking network was shattered. Lives were saved. It wasn't justice. Nothing could be after what Elena endured, but it was resolution. It was truth finally dragged into light. It was the best Marcus could do with the time he'd been given, that his sister had not. If this story touched your heart, don't let it fade into silence. Every missing person is more than a name. They're a life, a memory, a voice that still matters. If you believe stories like this should never be forgotten, please like, share, and subscribe to help keep their memory alive. Together, we honor the lost. Together, we give silence a voice. Because remembering isn't just love, it's justice.